Hey guys, on today's video I'm going to show you how to create an Angular component and what is data binding in Angular. So let's get started with this new Angular project, which is completely new and it has the default Angular values in a new project. You can see that it has the default app component HTML, the Sass, the TypeScript, and also the default app module. Let's go ahead and serve our application with the ng serve command. And you can use whatever terminal you want, either CMD, PowerShell, Bash, etc. For this case, I'll be using PowerShell inside my VS Code. And I'll open up my second terminal in a split way so you guys can see both of these terminals. Now that it's served, let's see our app and let's open up our browser and go into our localhost on port 4200. And you can see this is the default Angular project with the default Tour of Heroes, the CLI documentation, and the Angular blog. Let's go ahead and create our first component. And since Angular has a very powerful CLI, we're going to use exactly that to create our first component through the CLI. The way to do that is with the command ng generate component. And after this, we're going to name the component. So in this case, it's going to be ng generate component my component. You can see that the CLI creates 4 new files: the HTML, the TypeScript, the Sass, and the spec file, which is used for unit testing. You can see that also it updates our app module. And if we open it up, we can see that it automatically imported my component and also declared it down in here on the declarations. And since we created the component through the CLI, Angular does this completely automatically. If we want to create a component manually, we will need to make these changes ourselves. Let's go ahead and open my component and main app component. I'm gonna get rid of the routed outlet, leaving the default component, and I'll add my component in here and save it. So it reloads my app, and you can see that it will add up my component to the app browser. This is the component HTML, and let's go ahead and change our component. Let's add, instead of the my component works, let's add a hello world in here. And you can see that when the app reloads, it will show up our new changes. If we open up our main file, which is the TypeScript file, you can see that Angular will already add up some code in here. You can see that first in the first line, we have the imports from the component and uninit, which imports from the Angular core, which are some basic stuff from the component that every component will be using. The component is a component decorator, which basically just adds some metadata to our component, specifying that our selector, for example, is app my component. And you already saw me using this selector on the app main component HTML. And this is the way that we can add this component to our Angular projects in our HTML files. Then we also have our template URL, and you can change this for just template instead of template URL and add your own HTML inside of here without using any external file. And everything is going to be inside backticks. So if you're going to be using a short component, you can add up your HTML in here and there's no problem with that. But I like to keep it separated, so I'm just gonna undo these changes. Next is the style URL, and this is where we're gonna add our specific files for this component. And all these CSS rules that we add in here won't affect any other component, but only this one. And then we have our class, which is the component itself, and it's going to implement the onInit, which is an Angular lifecycle hook. Angular has a couple more of these life cycles, such as after view init and on destroy, for example. But right now, we're just going to be using the onInit, which is the default for every component that we create. The onInit event is basically whenever the component loads up. And if we add a console log, for example, on the init, we will see that log whenever the component initializes. So basically, this is the code that will run as soon as the component loads up. Let's open up our console on our browser, and you can see that the console message appeared in here at the first line. And even if we refresh our app, you can see that it's on the first line as well. Back to our TypeScript file, on the constructor is where we're going to add our services, which I'll explain in a later video, so don't worry too much about that. And finally, if we want to add some functions, methods, or variables, we're going to add them inside of here. So let's add, for example, a public variable named myBar. And let's initialize it with some name. Now, if we go inside our component HTML, we can bind our variable so we can display it. And to do that, we need to add some curly braces, and inside we can call out our variable. You can see that it refreshes up the new name on the browser. And if we change the variable value, it will change the HTML automatically again. But we also have something called two-way data binding, and it's used, for example, on forms. So let's add an input, and on side of it, let's add something called an ng model. And we're going to initialize this ng model with the variable. The variable we're going to use is myBar. So basically, everything that the user enters in this input will affect myBar and will assign that value to my variable. Right now, it's giving me an error because we need to import the forms module inside our main app module. So let's go ahead and do that. On our main app module, we need to import the forms module from the Angular forms. And then we need to specify on the imports. Now we shouldn't have any errors. So let's save and open up our browser. You can see the input is already filled with myBar value, and that is because we have specified that myBar is bound to our input tag. And if we change something on this input, it will change our output here on the top. Let's go ahead and create also a simple function that just console logs our value on a certain time whenever we click the button. So let's create also that button on the HTML file. The same way we have onClick on JavaScript, we have something that it's called just click in Angular, which is basically the same exact thing. So whenever we click this button, we're going to trigger a function, which is going to console log our current value of the myBar. Finally, another thing we can do with data binding is to add some images and specify the source through a variable. And we can do that the same way as we did with the HTML, with the double braces. So let's go ahead and create this new variable with the source for an image and also the image tag on the HTML file. Now, here in the browser, you can see that it adds up the image, but we can change the source through our specific TypeScript file. And also you can change the way we add up images. So instead of using curly braces, we can use some brackets inside of source property. And that means that instead of having a literal string on our source, it will look up for a variable with that name. In this case, myBar. Okay guys, that will be all for today's video. And if you like it, please leave a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. See you guys in the next video.